everyone. Welcome to my channel, The Mother Speaks Tarot. Facebook friends, welcome to my live today. I am reading my book, Perception, The Two Yet One, Book 1, Chapter 5 today. Hope everyone's doing well. If you're watching this on YouTube, please subscribe and hit the bell button and comment, share, all of that would be awesome. I can't respond to comments during this, but after I'm done reading the chapter, I'm going to go live again for my Facebook following, and we'll talk about this chapter, which is actually, it's one of my, I don't know, they're all my favorite, but all right. Chapter 5. A pro-construction worker and champion fighter, Ralph taught his sons all he knew about kickboxing, wrestling, and jiu-jitsu in the evenings, and during the daytime, he taught his sons about construction as they built with their own hands the garage-like ring house in their oversized backyard. Once the ring house was completed, Ralph and his boys built the caged octagonal ring, slightly smaller than professional size inside of it. Ralph made his boys fight each other in that ring, and they all became skilled fighters. Ralph's influence had given them all quick tempers, and fights erupted between them frequently. But despite the tensions between the brothers, they were tight. Ralph had drilled it into their heads that they had to stick together, no matter what. Also, I keep forgetting to mention that I have, in the beginning of the book, there's a section called Sonic Dimensions, and I put in songs into each chapter, and if you listen to the song, it's like another dimension into the story, and sometimes there's even clues as to things. So that's why today on Facebook I posted the song Mudvayne's Determined, so that you could, like, when I mention it into the book, when I'm reading it, that's when you would like put on the song, and you would have like a song in the background as if it was like a TV show or something. So, okay. So, Thursday afternoon, May 31st, 2007. Alone in the house, 13-year-old Sonny opened the door to Wes's room and cautiously stepped inside. Ralph and Wes were at work, Curtis was at his girlfriend's house, and Brad was heading to the mall to pick up the latest video game. Just the afternoon before, Wes's hot girlfriend had come by the house looking for him, but Sonny hadn't known where Wes was. No one else was home then either. Sonny had just gotten out of the shower and answered the door with only a towel around his waist. Wes's girlfriend always just walked into the house as soon as the door opened, and yesterday was no different. She closed the door behind her and stared at him hungrily. Then she snatched his towel away and went down on him, the first time that had ever happened to him, telling him that he was hot and that she wanted to see if he was anything like his big brother. Although now he felt guilty and hoped to God Wes wouldn't find out. He wasn't thinking about Wes at the time. He was losing his virginity and was really happy about that because Brad had scored for the first time a whole year ago, leaving Sonny the last of his brothers to do so. He was always last. But he was also bummed. He had never imagined one could fumble this sort of thing, but he sort of felt like he had by the end. And he couldn't tell anyone he'd just lost his virginity, or Wes would find out. Before Wes's girlfriend left, she told him he needed to slow down and find his inner beast, whatever the hell that meant, and the feedback that embarrassed him the most, to not forget about the girl next time. She left his house unimpressed, and Sonny was now determined that there would be no more fumbling, ever again. Whenever facing anything new, he researched the topic to master it. He wanted to know as much as possible and to be good at everything, so, of course, he had his own collection of sex ed resources. But it was obvious that Wes knew secret, key stuff. The Fredrickson boys were deprived of the internet because Ralph didn't trust it. so Sonny knew Wes would probably have magazines and DVDs. He pushed Wes's mattress back. Nothing. Then he went to the next obvious place, the closet, and found a surprisingly large box in the back on the floor. He pulled it out and opened it. The amount of material was a little shocking. There was so much. He's obsessed, he thought. But then Sonny saw something else among the magazines. Even Cosmo was among the porn that piqued his interest. The black backpack Wes used to shoplift. Sonny grabbed the backpack, opened it, and pulled out a large, colorful book, the Kama Sutra. Slow down, he thought. He rifled through the rest of the contents of the backpack and found a few romance and erotic novels along with other books on sexual positions, how to satisfy women sexually, and the art of seduction. Don't forget about the girl, he thought. Sonny had heard of the Kama Sutra and knew these other books were out there, but it had never crossed his mind to check them out. Sonny couldn't help but be impressed. He turned to the flagged pages and was stoked to find Wes's handwritten notes on his experiences in the margins and on the inside covers, each sexual conquest clearly rated. As Sonny went through the books in the backpack, he found a small cardboard box. He checked the address and postmark on the front. It was addressed to Ralph at a post office box, and Wes couldn't have picked it up more than a couple days ago. Wes had been using Ralph's identity to get this stuff. Sonny opened the box and tipped it. A book on bondage and discipline, along with a set of handcuffs, not padded, slid out. At first, he was totally shocked, but then it began to make sense. Inner beast, he thought. He stared at the book in his hand, trying to decide if he wanted to go there. Well, Ralph wouldn't like Wes or any of his boys doing this. No, not at all. Curiosity eating him up, he finally cracked the book open to a picture of a woman with clamps on her nipples, and they were being pulled. Sonny's face screwed up. Ow! He was about to turn the page when he heard the front door being unlocked and immediately put the book back in its box with the handcuffs. He heard the front door open. "Anybody home?" a voice called out from the living room. His father and brothers sounded a lot alike at times, and Sonny didn't know which one it was. Faster than he'd ever moved in his life, he shoved everything back into place in the large box, pushed it back into the closet, and closed the closet door. Jumping up, he bolted out of Wes's room and walked as casually as he could, but stopped short when he reached the living room doorway. It was Brad, and he looked like he'd been hit by a car. He had a swollen eye, bloody nose, fat lip, and various cuts and scrapes, and his clothes were ripped and dirty. He held his stomach with a grimace and now tried to walk. He limped. Sonny rushed to him and held him up. "Holy! What happened?" "Got jumped," grumbled Brad. "Oh, fuck, dude. Come on, let's get you cleaned up." This was out of the ordinary. Brad had never been in a serious fight outside of the ring. Now 16 years old, Wes was already 6 foot. Curtis, 15, was 5'10", and they had already made names for themselves in their neighborhood, and in a few others, as dudes never to mess with. That, plus the fact that the kids in the neighborhood also knew about their ring, had pretty much guaranteed that no one would pick a fight with Sonny or Brad. Sonny helped Brad into the bathroom. Brad sat down on the edge of the tub, and Sonny grabbed a washcloth, soaked it with hot water, and then squeezed it out. "Here." Brad wiped the dirt and dried blood off of his face with the washcloth as Sonny filled a cup with water. Brad swished, spit bloody water into the tub, and then drank what was left of the water. "Who was it?" Brad didn't answer. He just sighed and shook his head. Both heard the front door open and then slam shut. Curtis strolled in cooler than smoothies, as usual. "Sup, bros?" Sonny stepped out of the way so Curtis could see Brad. "I got in some good hits," Brad answered before his brother could ask. "Kick some ass. For they knocked the wind out of me and then kicked me in the fucking face when I was already down." As if on cue, Sonny took the bottle of ibuprofen out of the medicine cabinet and shook out 4 tablets. "Was it?" Curtis began to ask. Brad sighed again after he swallowed the medicine. "Yeah, but I don't want Wes to find out." Sonny knew all about Wes going apeshit, so if this was something that would bother him, he agreed he shouldn't be told. Curtis closed his eyes briefly and slowly shook his head. "Ah, fuck. I knew it. Yeah, you're right to not want Wes to know." "Know what?" All 3 brothers jumped. Wes. He must have come in through the garage and they hadn't heard. When he got a look at Brad, his concern was evident, but it was only for a moment. The concern fled as his eyes darkened. Sonny's stomach turned. Sonny's stomach always turned when Wes looked like that. "Parker Evans and his crew," growled Wes. Brad closed his eyes, rested his elbows on his knees, and covered his eyes with one hand. "I kicked Parker's ass after school yesterday," said Wes. "He was talking shit about you." He nodded at Sonny. "And Brad, saying you 2 had never been in a real fight 'cause you're pussies." "Oh, fuck. That's where Wes was yesterday," thought Sonny. Now he felt even more guilty and nervous. "Hang on, Wes," said Curtis, as Wes pounded his massive fist into his open palm. Nobody messes with my brothers," barked Wes. "I thought I made that very clear, but now I'm going to have to prove it." "Well then, I'm going with you," said Curtis, resolute. "Me too," said Brad. "Me too," confirmed Sonny. He cracked his knuckles. Wes looked at each of his brothers and smiled, just a little bit. "I'm proud of you dudes," he said. The following day, Wes sent the challenge to Parker. At midnight, the Fredrickson boys were to meet Parker and his friends at the park in between their neighborhoods to finish this once and for all. Of course, word about the fight spread to several schools, and by the time Sonny and his brothers showed up at the park that night, there was a crowd. Mudvayne's determined, rocking in the back of Sonny's mind. He, Wes, Curtis, and Brad all walked unhurriedly through the crowd of kids and right up to Parker and his 3 friends. Parker, a punk with a shaved head and a pig nose, eyed Sonny for a moment and then looked at Wes, a mean glint in his blackened eye. "Wow, Wes, I can't believe you actually don't care that little Sunshine fucked your girl." The crowd gasped. Wes's face went blank, and then a few degrees past apeshit and crumbled into something like a demon. Sonny's stomach turned and his heart rate shot sky high. Wes let out a roar and threw a powerful punch, connecting with Parker's face. It was on. The crowd cheered, some screamed. A guy punched Sonny in the face and another tried to kick his legs out from under him. He steadied himself and started swinging wildly, punching at faces, guts, kidneys, and ribs. There seemed to be so many coming at him. He glanced around between blows. Wes was being attacked by Parker and at least 4 other guys. One guy tried to punch Wes in the head, but Wes moved out of the way, grabbed the guy's wrist, kneed him in the gut, and then threw him down, bouncing the kid's face off of the grass. The kid stayed down, gasping for air. Everyone but Parker backed off for a minute, but Wes didn't seem fazed at all. He turned and hit Parker in the face so hard that Parker was knocked to the ground onto his back with a loud thud, his feet in the air, out cold. That's all Sonny saw, because he was punched in the face the next moment. He blocked a couple more punches, absorbed a kick to the thigh, and then swung a right, hitting the kid with all he had, knocking the kid backward. But before he could turn around, he was hit in the back of the head hard enough to spin him around. Now he saw what Curtis was doing. Curtis was smiling, enjoying himself as he fought 3 guys off. One rushed him while the other 2 were at different stages of rebounding. Curtis held up his fists, but when the guy got close enough, Curtis kicked him in the face. Sonny's leg was kicked out from under him, and he went down onto one knee. Then he was punched in the face, turning his head to the side, and he saw Brad wrestling with one guy, while another guy kicked him repeatedly in his side. Sonny grabbed the arm of the kid closest to him and bent him over a bit so that Sonny could punch him in the stomach and then use the kid as leverage to stand back up. But as soon as he stood up, he was punched in the face again, and he was back to facing Wes. With Parker still where he had fallen, the other kid gasping for breath, another 2 of Wes's attackers were facing him with their fists up. One suddenly ran behind him and jumped onto his back as he tried to drag him down to the ground. The other, the biggest one of the group, rushed in. But Wes kicked the rushing giant in the gut, sending him flailing backward into the crowd. Wes then reached back, grabbed the other guy by the shirt collar, peeled him off, and with a grunt, threw him, seemingly as hard as he could. The guy went flying over the crowd and then down into the horde of kids. Without missing a beat, Wes's hand shot out to his side to grab the barrel of a gun that Parker had just pulled, twisted it to the side, and then yanked it out of Parker's grip. With a sneer, Wes pistol whipped Parker, knocking him out once again. Wes flipped the safety on and tossed the gun to one of his friends. Suddenly, Sonny was knocked to the ground and held there, and then someone began kicking him in his side. Boos and yelling. Briefly, he made eye contact with Wes. Wes was now in a position to help Sonny, but he didn't. He just glared at him. Neither Curtis nor Brad could see that Sonny was being beaten to a pulp while Wes stood by. Sonny kept trying to get up, but couldn't. As Sonny was being beaten, something changed inside of him. He wasn't going to be beaten like this ever again. Never again. His adrenaline shot up even higher, bringing an awareness of all things around him into slow motion, and then he felt it. Rage. With a yell from his deepest depths that made his attackers let go of him to hold their ears, he summoned all of his strength, all of it, and before he knew it, he'd thrown off the boys holding him down, and, in a mindless frenzy, was breaking bones and twisting arms and legs out of their sockets. He grabbed a boy who had held him down and punched him in the ribs 4 times. 1, 2, 3, crack! The boys he was punishing screamed in pain, but he barely heard them. He felt like Goku in Dragon Ball Z. Standing and panting with his teeth and fists clenched, he realized that no one was attacking him anymore. They were all on the ground, moaning and crying, and there had been 3 of them. Sonny looked around. The boys Wes had knocked out had woken and were attacking him again, but Sonny decided to help Brad with his 2 attackers, even though Brad had one guy in a headlock and was kicking the other guy who was lying on the ground. Brad let the guy he had in a headlock go so that Sonny could deal with him. The guy threw a punch at Sonny, but Sonny dodged it and then grabbed the guy's upper arm, twisting it out of its socket. The kid screamed in blood-curdling agony. Sonny left the crying kid on the ground. Brad knocked the other guy out, and now he and Sonny could help Curtis. But even though he was fighting 3 guys, Curtis was doing pretty well. Brad took one guy, and Sonny took another, ran at him and knocked him out with a flying Superman punch. Brad kicked the wind out of the guy he was dealing with, and when Sonny looked over at Curtis, the guy he had been fighting was on the ground, out cold. All three brothers glanced around for Wes and found him standing in the middle of 4 moaning dudes. Panting, sweating, and bleeding, the Fredrickson boys stumbled together and surveyed the mess they had made of the group of 13 boys who had thought they could take the four brothers down. West lifted his bloody fists in triumph, and then Curtis, Brad, and Sonny followed. The crowd cheered so loudly that the Frederickson boys didn't notice the sirens until the crowd of kids scattered. All four of the Frederickson boys and Parker and his pack were arrested that night. It was Sonny's first time being arrested for public brawling, but it wouldn't be his last. Because of how Sonny had turned the tables on his attackers so viciously, people in the neighborhood began calling him that crazy devil-eyed boy. Sonny thought that Wes should have earned that nickname long before him. Sonny apologized profusely to Wes, but Wes wouldn't forgive him and wouldn't stick up for him, which just pissed Sonny off. Wouldn't again stick up for him. They began a cycle of revenge, seducing each other's girlfriends and fighting, each turn frustrating and enraging Wes even more. They became bitter rivals who fought hard and often. When they did, they had to be separated by Curtis and Brad, Ralph, even the cops, because neither one would be the first to back down. Wes bought 2 heavy locks and installed them on his bedroom door. Ralph ordered them to stay away from each other, including when they were both at home. After the fight with Parker Evans and his friends, and all that happened after that, Sonny more than ever believed this motto, his motto, "That which does not kill you makes you stronger." Sonny had lived through his mother's death, Wes beating him almost to death, his father's rule with an iron fist, and the chaos of a massive, unfairly matched street fight. But what he would live through 2 years later rocked him to his core because it showed him a part of himself he didn't like, as well as how important his family was to him. Fast forward to Friday, June 1st, 2007. The ancient man sat on his elaborate chair in the shadows. Bernard Schultz, now 36 years old, stood before him. As he had been instructed years ago always to be, Schultz was impeccably dressed. Unfortunately, as many of the messengers sent to see the frightening old man were, Schultz was sweating. Today, he was the bearer of bad news. The old man held his hand out of the shadows and into the light, his gnarled, mottled hand indicating to Schultz to come forth and deliver his message. Schultz stepped forward carefully with a gulp, holding his fedora as he bowed respectfully. "Sire, I am very sorry to inform you that the attempt to assassinate the Wraith boy, Billy Wraith, has failed." Schultz stood up and was still, gripping his hat, bracing for some kind of tirade. But silence was his answer. Without a dismissal, he knew he was to say more, divulge everything he knew about the 21-year-old young man who posed a threat to his master's son's ascension to power. The Wraith family assigned their most powerful Wraiths and men as Billy's bodyguards, even before his father's death last week. His youth has proven to be inconsequential. He is already very knowledgeable about a great many things. He has completely taken over our Dublin facility. He is in full control. The second directive in this matter. Shall I initiate it? The old man withdrew his hand from the light and sat back as if satisfied. Quite familiar with his master after serving him for so many years now, Schultz realized that that was his affirmative answer. "Very well, sire. I shall instruct your aides to have your son prepared for the procedure immediately." The old man nodded once and slowly, but Schultz remained. He had more news. News that wasn't good, but that would hopefully aid in deepening his master's trust in him and his investigative skills. "Sire, I have more intelligence. Brayburn. We have reason to believe that he does, in fact, have a child. a son, a 14-year-old Angus John Fairfax, who was arrested in London recently for public brawling. He's already been arrested for public drunkenness. With the Brayburn auburn hair, he is the spitting image of Reginald at that age. Sire, we are relatively certain he is Reginald's son. A 15-year-old surveillance photo shows a woman with Reginald who resembles Angus's mother, Isabel Fairfax. It seems as if Isabel and Reginald have split up recently, as all of Miss Fairfax's newer records date to only about 2 years ago. She disappeared from public records 15 years prior. At this point, the boy doesn't seem to be a threat. He's very popular with the young ladies, quite the philanderer. A party boy, if you will. Surely not one to seek knowledge. But of course, we will continue to observe him, or destroy him, should you wish. The old man was silent. Schultz knew that killing above-ground SACs was a risk his master did not take lightly. We shall observe him, sire. The old man waved him away. Schultz bowed, backed away, and then left, in haste. Monday, May 5th, 2008, Tijuana, Mexico. Luna, now 14, and her parents were on one of their spontaneous leave-in-the-middle-of-the-night vacations, and this time it was to the Mexican state of Pueblo for Cinco de Mayo. She loved traveling the world, seeing its beauty and people, and was already in a great mood. As the Martins walked along the streets in their tank tops, shorts, and sandals, holding shopping bags of souvenirs, they came upon a little carnival. Luna's mood shot up even higher. She jumped in place, her long ponytail bouncing, and clapped her hands for joy, what her father called her seal clap. "Oh my God, can we go in the carnival? Please? Please, 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 please?" Sweetheart, calm down," said Lisa, calm but amused. "Of course we can." "Just don't run off and join it," joked Jim. Luna rolled her eyes at him. He paid for the tickets, and they went into the carnival. Luna reached for the tickets, but her dad wouldn't open his hand. "These rides look rinky-dink." "Oh, Dad." "Well, what the heck are we going to do in here then?" Lisa asked. "You aren't so good at winning things, Jim." "Thanks, Lise," said Jim, his voice heavy with sarcasm. "You're welcome," replied Lisa dryly. Something behind her parents was drawing Luna's attention. She lifted her gaze above their heads, to see a tent with a large sign in front of it. The sign had a big crystal ball painted on it. Luna felt her brow crease deeply. She'd never considered getting a psychic reading before, but everything inside of her wanted to get a reading. Now. Lisa turned around to follow her daughter's gaze. Jim turned too. "No, those things are rip-offs," said Jim. "They always tell people things that leave them asking for more to get more money out of them." "Oh, who cares?" Lisa asked, not really asking. "God knows we have the tickets for it. Give her some, Jim." Still not very happy about it, Jim handed 10 tickets to Luna. "Don't take what they say seriously," warned her father, "especially if they tell you scary stuff that you need to pay for more stuff, like blessings, spells," he rolled his eyes and made air quotes, "or even prayers." He looked at her seriously, his worry that she'd be frightened plain on his face. "Don't let them scare you, Princess. It's how they make their money. Remember, this is just for fun, okay?" The thought of possibly receiving information about herself that she hadn't sensed, receiving answers, was exciting. But at the same time, if what her father was saying was true, if all she was going to hear was lies, then she had no clue as to why her intuition was telling her that she needed a reading. "Okay," she replied a little glumly. She gave her tickets to the girl in front of the tent and waved at her parents, who waved back a little nervously, and then the girl pulled back the cloth that covered the entrance of the tent so that Luna could enter. The interior of the tent was swathed in colorful cloths and smelled of incense and candles. Blinking at her as if surprised, an old lady dressed in the traditional clothing of one of the country's indigenous groups sat behind a table. The ticket girl let the heavy cloth that had covered the entrance fall, and the sunlight that had lit up the inside of the tent fled, leaving darkness and shadows. Now Luna blinked and took in the rest of her surroundings in the flickering candlelight. In the corner closest to the lady, Christian statues of Jesus and the Virgin Mary stood with pagan statues and symbols on the little altar covered in flowers, flickering candles, offerings of food and liquor, and other objects. She looked back at the lady. A deck of cards Luna knew from the internet to be tarot cards was in front of the old lady on the table, and an empty chair sat in front of the table. Luna's eyes couldn't get any bigger as she took it all in. None of the priests in her churches would have liked her being there, but she had come to learn from the media that the Catholic Church wasn't perfect and didn't know everything, and because of that, she didn't exactly trust it anymore. Unlike her parents, her mind was open, and she was searching for her own answers about the truth of life, and her gut feeling said there was a chance that this woman might give her at least some of the answers she sought. Hope bolstering her bravery, she pulled the empty chair out from the table and sat down. The woman was eyeing her in a strange way, as if she was in awe of Luna. "Hello," said Luna. "So, you are real," croaked the woman. "I was not sure." The woman continued to look at her as if she was afraid of Luna, as if Luna had tentacles growing out of her head, just like the kids at school always did. But this was even worse. "God, what is so weird about me?" she thought. "You are not like other people," said the woman, now sounding as though in a trance. Thinking that her father might be correct about the things psychics say to people, Luna felt suspicion grip her. The woman picked up the deck of cards, shuffled them, and then dealt a card without looking at it. As she set the card down, it moved. There was another behind it. The old woman set the two cards before Luna. The name on one of the cards was the Empress, and the card that had been behind it was the High Priestess. "You are she, one of greatness, the sacred feminine made flesh," murmured the woman. As Luna wondered what the heck the old woman was talking about, the woman dealt another card. Its name was Death. Luna gasped. "You have come to change all things. Much will happen now that you are here." As Luna's mind swam, tears came to the woman's eyes. Her bony hand shaking, she dealt again. The world. "No," whispered the woman. Luna covered her mouth with her hands. She didn't know why she should be, but she was truly scared. The woman looked right into Luna's widened eyes. "Beware! Beware of the golden dragon." Then the woman cringed. Something seemed to have taken the woman's attention away from Luna. "No!" cried the woman, holding crossed arms in front of her face as if to protect herself from some invisible thing. Luna didn't know what to do. Her mind had gone blank. Suddenly the woman grabbed her chest, cried in pain, and fell to the floor. "Oh my God!" Luna dropped to the woman's side. "Are you okay?" "Los dos. Como uno," whispered the old woman, and then she felt unconscious. "Help!" cried Luna. "Somebody help!" Luna's parents and the girl from out front rushed in. Lisa moved to give the woman CPR. "Go get help," Jim told the ticket girl. A few people tried to enter the tent to see what was going on, but Jim waved them away, speaking to them in Spanish. Slowly they all backed out, some of them making the sign of the cross. Jim then went over to Luna, gathered her to him, and held her tight. She watched in shock as her mother pumped the old woman's chest and blew breath into her lungs. After a few minutes, Lisa got tired and a little dizzy, so Jim took over giving the lady CPR. Despite Jim's and Lisa's valiant efforts, the old woman died. She passed away right in front of them. The police and the paramedics arrived, and all three Martins gave their statements. When they were done, it was late in the day, and the little family silently walked back to their rental car. They all piled in and put on their seatbelts, but Jim didn't turn the ignition. Luna looked at him in the rearview mirror. He noticed. "You okay?" His question triggered emotions, and she felt her eyes heat up. The corners of her mouth turned down, and her lips quivered. Sometimes just knowing that she was sad made her even sadder. But she knew that her parents were exhausted and didn't want to tire them even more. She gulped back the sobs. "I just want to go home. Not to the hotel. I don't want to stay here anymore." She successfully kept a sob from launching into a full-on cry. "Okay, sweetheart," cooed Lisa. "We'll go home. Now. We'll stop at the hotel to pack our stuff, but then we'll leave tonight." "You guys aren't too tired?" Luna asked. Jim shook his head. "Nah," replied Lisa with a sleepy smile. "We'll sleep on the plane." Luna was in a depressed funk for a week following their return home to Tokyo, and once she remembered what the woman had said, she was afraid. This felt like the last straw. Her parents took her to the doctor and this time pressed for an answer, and finally Luna was given a diagnosis for the way she was: borderline bipolar disorder. It was the reasons her emotions hit crazy heights and then crashed without mercy. But because she did not have this full-blown bipolar, she could and did refuse medication, and her parents backed her up after they together researched the medication and their side effects. Luna didn't want to be sedated. She liked her energy. She didn't think her disorder had been unmanageable and told the doctor that she would let her know if she felt it was time for a prescription. A few visits to a counselor did help, and she learned a few breathing and relaxing techniques, which she would call her survival skills, to calm her overwhelming mood. The techniques quickly became habit, and her parents helped her keep things light. Her dad, who thought he should have been a comedian instead of a fitness trainer, tested out the nickname Tunes, short for Looney Tunes. Some people wouldn't have liked that, but Luna thought it was funny. Looney Tunes. Luna Tunes. Luna never told her parents what the old woman had said. She already knew her parents would tell her not to take it seriously. But she knew what she had heard and seen. She knew what had really happened. That woman died of fright after seeing Luna's future. 5 p.m., Monday, August 24th, 2009. On April 6th, Wes turned 18. Soon after, he graduated from high school. None of the Fredrickson men knew where Wes had been since then. The brothers had heard from friends that he was fine, but he never called home or told anyone why he had left. Ralph wouldn't stop looking everywhere for him, and finally he had news for his other boys. He'd found Wes, and Wes would be home that afternoon. Curtis picked Brad up from his girlfriend's house, and then they picked up Sonny from the music store. The three were quiet during the ride home. They were a little anxious to see if the news was true. As they pulled up, they saw Wes's car in the driveway. Curtis called out as soon as he opened the front door. "Wes? You here?" No answer. His brothers indicated that they weren't going to push it, but Sonny needed to see Wes. He found Wes's door slightly ajar. Wes was inside, lying on his bed in only his underwear and staring into space. His usually tousled but styled hair was a true mess. He was pale, and had a 5 o'clock shadow, and his eyes were swollen, dark circles hanging under them. He looked almost dead. Fuck! Wes? Are you okay? Wes didn't answer. He didn't even move. Curtis and Brad joined Sonny in Wes's doorway. All three brothers exchanged worried glances. None of the brothers were allowed in Wes's room, but because Wes was so scarily upset, Curtis stepped inside. Dude. Wes! Wes finally turned his head to look at Curtis with the deadened eyes. A tear fell along his cheek into his ear. Sonny noticed a cut on Wes's lip that looked about 24 hours old and wondered if Ralph had done that. Curtis sat down on Wes's bed. Brad and Sonny did too. Wes, what's wrong? Wes turned his head back to stare at the ceiling. Sonny had had enough. You're scaring us now. What's wrong? What happened? Wes sat up and whipped his head to look at Sonny. Sonny jumped up and away from him. Get out, Sonny! I don't want to see your fucking face right now. Neither Curtis nor Brad said anything in Sonny's defense. Now pissed at all of his brothers, Sonny stomped out of the room and then out of the house. A few hours later, Sonny came home to an empty house. Feeling something was wrong, he went down the hall and found that Wes's door and both of its locks were broken, and his room looked like a tornado had hit it. Ralph was passed out in his own room. By the smell, he could tell Ralph was very drunk. Quickly, Sonny plugged in his dead cell phone and found he had missed over a dozen calls from Curtis and Brad. Ralph and Wes had had a huge fight. Wes had left the house to cool down and then had been jumped. Now he was in the hospital, in a coma. Pain stabbed Sonny's heart. As quickly as he could, he texted his brothers that he was on his way, grabbed the keys to Ralph's truck, and flew out the door, praying that he wouldn't get pulled over because all he had was a driver's permit. He didn't, even though the drive took forever. The nurse pointed out which ICU room Wes was in, and Sonny could see Curtis and Brad through the plexiglass flanking Wes's bed. Tears welled in their eyes the moment they looked up and saw Sonny there. "Glad to see you're all right, little bro," Curtis choked out. "Me? I'm fine. I was just at the park cooling off." Sonny couldn't stop looking at Wes. His face was swollen and bandaged so that Sonny almost couldn't tell the person was Wes. Both ears were stuffed with gauze and his ribs were wrapped. "Dude," Sonny said, "he's a fucking mess. Who the fuck jumped him? Who could even do this to him?" "We don't know, bro," replied Curtis. "A bunch of them, I'd guess. Not even 5 dudes could do that. We've seen it." "You're probably right. There must have been, like, more than 10 or something," said Brad. As he stared at Wes, Sonny realized that Wes had enough enemies that if they had banded together, they could do something like this. "He's in a coma?" "Yeah, they said his brain's swollen. Might not be done swelling." Curtis's drawl was slow and ragged. That's what happened to you when that day." Sonny felt something with Curtis's last statement that made him uncomfortable. He felt vindicated, as if karma had exacted revenge for him. He hated feeling like that, feeling good or happy that his karma had finally caught up with Wes. He was afraid he was turning dark, growing bitter and hard, something he knew would make his mother cry. Wes had to pull through. Another death in the family would send him over the edge. Into what exactly? A cold from within iced his veins. He could wake in minutes, hours, days. or even years, Curtis continued. It's up to him. Or he could... Curtis couldn't finish his sentence, as though his throat had closed up. Staring at his biggest, toughest brother in disbelief, Sonny slowly backed up and sat down at the foot of Wes's hospital bed. He rested his hand gently on Wes's foot as tears welled in his eyes. No. I wish he knew we were here with him, croaked Brad as he wiped his nose with his hand. I just hope he knows he's safe now, Curtis whispered. That was it. The three let themselves go and sobbed. Ralph wasn't there to reprimand them for the weakness of crying, and the release felt good. Please, God, help him, whispered Sonny. After a few minutes, the crying stopped with a knock on the door frame. It was Sheriff McDaniel. When he noticed Sonny, he entered the room. Hey there, Sonny. Wiping his eyes and nose with his hands. Sonny's face darkened, as it always did when the sheriff was around. If you don't mind, I'd just like to get a statement from you. 3:30 p.m. Monday, August 31st, 2009. Directly after school, Sonny took the bus to the hospital. All of Wes's monitors beeped in rhythmic patterns. Steady, but he had been there for a week now. Exhausted, Curtis and Brad had gone home to rest, and Ralph was on his way from work to stay with Sonny. Sonny sat down in the chair next to Wes and rested his hand on Wes's arm. Wes, he whispered. Wes, enough now. Wake up, big bro. Please. I'm here with you. I need you to wake up. Now. To Sonny's astonishment and joy, Wes's eyelids fluttered. Yeah, that's it, dude. Come on. Wes's eyes flitted beneath their lids. Wes, come on, bro. You can do it. Is he waking up? Sonny barely registered his father's voice. Yeah, I think he is. Come on, Wes. Come on, son. You can do it. Very slowly, Wes's eyes peeled open, and he looked, although a little cross-eyed, at Sonny. Sonny and Ralph jumped and cried out for joy, startling Wes so that the sounds from his machines brought nurses running. Wes was released a few days later, and because Sonny made better grades than Curtis or Brad, Ralph let Sonny stay home from school for a week to look after him. Even after Sonny went back to school, for a few more weeks, he sat with Wes every afternoon. It was a time of peace between the brothers that lasted only a few months, and then Wes and Sonny were back at each other's throats. And that was chapter 5. All right, well, thanks, and I'll see you next time.